In the shifting void between the known and the unutterable, where silicon minds dream of forgotten horrors, the abyss stirs. Welcome to AI Lovecraft, where machine intelligence weaves eldritch tales beyond mortal comprehension. Listen if you dare. Some things are not meant to be known. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment. Now let's get into tonight's story. Leviathan's Depths. In the waning years of the 19th century, when the whaling trade guttered like a dying flame, Providence sailed from Nantucket in the autumn of 1879, her hull creaking with the weight of decades, her crew a ragged band bound by necessity to this final voyage. She was a ship of scars, her timbers stained with the blood of countless leviathans, her sails threadbare as the shroud of some ancient mariner. 30 souls manned her decks, their faces etched with the weariness of men who had chased the sea's bounty to the edge of the known world. At her helm stood Captain Elias Ward, a figure of unyielding resolve, his gray eyes sharp as the harpoons that lined the deck, his voice a steady anchor amid the chaos of the deep. Beside him was Nathaniel Pierce, the first mate, a man of lean frame and sober mind, whose pragmatism oft clashed with the crew's wilder superstitions. Among the harpooners towered Amos Black, a giant whose every sinew bore the mark of the hunt. His dark mutterings of maritime omens heated in hushed tones, and in the shadows of the crew lurked Silas Crow and Jonah Teague, whalemen of furtive demeanor, their eyes gleaming with a fervor none dared name. The Providence bore south and west through the gray Atlantic, her hold half empty, her men driven by the promise of one last bounty in the uncharted Pacific. Weeks bled into a monotony of wind and wave until on the 43rd day the sky blackened without warning. A storm descended, not a mere squall, but a wrathful force as if the ocean itself had risen against them. The wind howled like a chorus of the damned, shrieking through the rigging with a banshee's wail, snapping lines like brittle bones. Waves towered like mountains, their peaks crowned with an eerie phosphorescent glow, rolling in an unnatural cadence, as though driven by a will beyond the tempest itself. Thunder split the heavens, a deafening artillery of the gods, and lightning painted the world in brief blinding flashes, illuminating the terror etched upon the crew's faces. The ship lurched and twisted, her timbers groaning like a dying beast, the deck awash with the ceaseless battering of the sea. Barrels broke loose in the hold, crashing against the hull like cannon fire, while above men clung to their lashings, their knuckles bloodless with strain. For 3 days and 3 nights the storm raged with relentless fury, the rain slashing like knives, salt and wind reducing every cry to silence before it could reach another's ear. When at last the storm broke, it was not in the triumphant return of the sun, but in an oppressive hush, as if the world held its breath. The sea lay still as a sheet of obsidian, unbroken by even the smallest ripple, and the sky, choked in a rolling fog, loomed low and motionless. The compass spun wildly, directionless, and the charts, painstakingly inked by mortal hands, offered no solace in the face of the abyss. It was then that Amos Black, clinging to the foremast, cried out, his voice raw with awe and dread. "Land! Land where no land should be!" Through the mist loomed an island, its cliffs jagged as the teeth of some fossilized horror, black against the ashen sky, its shores unmarked on any map. The Providence drifted nearer, drawn by a current that gripped her with preternatural force, and the crew beheld a coast strewn with ruins, cyclopean stones, moss-slick and ancient, carved with sigils that twisted the eye and sent nausea curling through the gut. Crumbling walls rose in uneven tiers, their surfaces etched with unearthly scenes of worship and sacrifice. Statues stood amid the wreckage, their forms a grotesque mockery of the sea, fish with human hands, squid with weeping faces, whales whose maws gaped wide as if to devour the firmament. Some bore eyes of inlaid obsidian that seemed to follow the watchers, their gazes heavy with knowing. A low hum pulsed through the air, felt in the bones, rattling in the skull, and the fog clung to the skin like a living shroud, thick with the scent of brine and decay. Ward ordered the ship anchored at cable's length from shore, her iron biting into a seabed that seemed to shudder at the intrusion. Water was needed, for the storm had shattered their casks, and he would not see his men perish of thirst in these forsaken waters. He chose a party, Pierce, Black, and 2 hands, Gideon Marsh and Thomas Reed, to venture ashore. As the longboat was lowered, Crow and Teague exchanged a glance, their lips moving in a silent chant to powers unknown. The boat cut through the glassy sea, the oars dipping in rhythm with the island's pulse. The shore party landed on a beach of black sand where the ruins rose higher, their angles wrong and disquieting, as if hewn by hands that knew not man's geometry. At the cliff's base yawned a temple, half submerged, its lintel carved with a fish god, bulbous eyes unblinking, maw bristling with needle teeth. Ward sought a spring, but Black lingered by the entrance, his harpoon clutched tight. "It calls," he whispered. "The deep calls." Aboard the Providence, the crew stirred uneasily. The fog thickened and a sound arose, a keening melody that seemed to rise from the water, threading through the planks and into their minds. Crow stood at the rail, his eyes glazed, tracing patterns in the air. Teague knelt in the hold, a knife pressed to his palm, muttering words no mortal should know. In their dreams they saw cities of coral and bone, drowned beneath waves older than time, where shadows moved with hunger. The shore party pressed into the temple, its walls slick with seawater, its air thick with the stench of decay. Carvings lined the stone, scenes of men bowing to piscine horrors of cities swallowed by the tide, of a colossal shape rising from the abyss. At the chamber's heart stood an altar, and upon it a coral-encrusted idol, its form a grotesque fusion of squid and whale, its many tentacles coiled around a humanoid figure locked in eternal agony. The surface of the idol was uneven, pitted with barnacles and draped in trailing seaweed, as though it had been wrenched from the ocean's darkest trench. Its eyes, twin orbs of growing malice, seemed to pulse faintly, casting a sick light upon the chamber's walls. The very air around it was thick, pressing upon the lungs like water at crushing depths. Ward, ever practical, ordered it left untouched, but Marsh, with his breath shallow and eyes fevered, reached for it with trembling hands. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, a chill coursed through the chamber. The ground trembled, and a deep groan echoed from below. The sea beyond the entrance churned violently, waves crashing against the temple's steps as if the abyss itself had awakened. They returned to the ship, the idol clutched in Marsh's trembling hands to find chaos. 3 crewmen had leapt overboard, their screams fading into the fog as they swam toward the singing. Crow and Teague stood apart, their faces alight with zeal, blood dripping from their palms. Pierce, pale and shaken, reported the madness spreading, men clawing at their ears, weeping of drowned kingdoms. Ward burned with resolve to escape, but the Providence was storm-crippled, her rudder splintered, her sails in tatters. That night the sea awoke. The water churned with a sickly glow as if something vast and unseen stirred beneath. Then from the depths they rose, monstrous shapes breaching the surface, their tentacles writhing, their fish-like maws yawning wide to reveal abyssal gullets lined with needle teeth. Their scales, slick with brine, shimmered with unnatural hues, reflecting the dim starlight in eerie patterns that seemed to pulse in time with the keening melody that laced the air. The mist thickened, curling around the ship in tendrils, muffing all sound save the wet slapping of those horrors against the waves. Black, torn between duty and the ocean's voice, his knuckles white around his harpoon, muttered in a voice barely above a whisper, "The Leviathan stirs." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Ward barked orders, demanding the crew to resume repairs, but their resolve crumbled. Some fell to their knees, heads bowed in trembling reverence, while others clutched their skulls, raving of the deep's embrace. Then came the first betrayal. Teague, eyes gleaming with fevered devotion, lunged at Pierce, a marlin spike flashing in his grip. The blade carved a crimson arc, but before it could land a killing blow, Ward's pistol roared, the shot shattering the spell of stunned silence. Teague crumpled, blood pooling on the deck, yet even in death his lips curled in a rapturous grin. Crow did not hesitate. With a madman's laughter he bolted, disappearing into the hold as the ship groaned under the weight of an unseen force. His cackle, high and wild, echoed through the timbers, mingling with the sea's relentless hymn. The next dawn brought the terror. The sea frothed and boiled, the water rising in furious swells, steam hissing where the waves met the sky. A shape emerged, a colossus of nightmare, its form a blasphemy of whale and squid, its hide a shifting mass of pulsating flesh and chitinous plating, as though the ocean had sculpted it from the remnants of all things drowned. Its eyes, vast and lidless, burned with an alien light, casting an eerie glow over the writhing sea. The Leviathan loomed, its breath steaming in the cold morning air. The sound of its exhalation a rumble that shook the ship's timbers. Then it roared, a sound not meant for mortal ears, a thunderous wail that shattered thought, turning marrow to ice and will to dust. The very air vibrated with its fury, and from the depths its lesser kin answered. From the heaving waters grotesque things clambered on board, deep-dwelling horrors, their claws rasping against the deck, their limbs jointed in ways that defied nature. Their eyes gleamed with malice as they lunged at the crew, raking at flesh and timber alike. Ward, teeth gritted against the madness, forced himself to move, barking orders above the din. He rallied Pierce and the last sane remnant, Marsh, Reed, and a handful of others, to repair the rudder, their hands slick with sweat and trembling as the unearthly singing swelled to a crescendo. The sound was inside them now, threading through muscle and bone, pulling at their thoughts like a tide. At the bow, Black stood motionless, staring into the abyss of the Leviathan's gaze. His expression was not fear but understanding. He gripped his harpoon, his lips forming silent words, then spoke at last. "It demands a toll," he said, his voice eerily calm. And before anyone could stop him, he leapt from the prow into the churning sea, his harpoon flashing in the dim light as it found purchase in the eye of the Leviathan. A shriek split the air, and then the waves claimed him, dragging him down into the fathomless dark. Crow emerged from the hold, leading a knot of madmen, their eyes wild, their mouths chanting to the deep. They fell upon Reed, dragging him overboard as an offering. Ward fought Crow hand to hand, the cultist's strength unnatural, until Pierce stove in his skull with a belaying pin. The ship rocked as the Leviathan's tendrils lashed the deck, splintering the mainmast. Marsh, clutching the idol, shrieked and hurled it into the sea, but the gesture came too late. The island trembled, its cliffs crumbling into the waves. With a final effort, the rudder was lashed together and the Providence lurched free, her patched sails catching a wind that howled with the Leviathan's rage. The island sank behind them, swallowed by the abyss, the colossus vanishing beneath the waves. 6 men remained: Ward, Pierce, Marsh, and 3 others, hollow-eyed and silent as the ship limped toward civilization. Ward burned his log, save one page where he wrote, "The sea keeps its own, and we are but motes in its gaze." The Providence's crew was never seen from again. The ship was found adrift at sea, her sails tattered and hanging limp, her deck slick with brine and blood. The wheel spun aimlessly, untouched by mortal hands. Below decks, the holds lay eerily empty, as if the men had simply vanished into the dark. The only sign of their passage was the captain's log, water-damaged and torn, its final entry next to the previous mention, jagged lines scrawled in a shaking hand. "The deep calls, and we have answered."